How do we age differently? In today's episode of Happiness Happens, I'm joined by my friend Yvonne, and we're talking all about what it looks like to age and aging differently. And even though you might be around my age, let's say in your 30s, 20s, 30s, maybe later 30s, there's this notion that we need to stay young forever, that we need to have the most perfect skin, that we need to have all of these different things in order for us to be valuable, if you will, in society. And we're talking today a little bit about why that might not necessarily be the case and how to look at life a little bit differently when it comes to aging. Yvonne hosts a podcast called Late Bloomer Living, where she talks about all these topics in depth every single episode. And she's bringing a little bit of her insight with us here today. So, without further ado, let's get into the conversation with Yvonne. Yvonne, welcome to Happiness Happens. I'm so excited to have you on the show today.
Can I tell you why I'm so excited to be here?
Yes, please.
I was thinking about this all morning and I was like, Simona is quite a bit younger than me. And I imagine that your listeners might also skew that way. And I am so excited to talk to your people about my thing. Because, I have to say, when I was in my 30s, I'm 55 now. I really didn't think about aging. In my 30s, I was living my best life. I had finally moved to New York City to pursue the theater career that I had wanted to pursue since I was 7 years old. We came to visit, and it was the 70s, and it was gritty, and there were triple X signs everywhere in Times Square. And I was like, I want to live here. And it was just in my mind as this thing. So in my 30s, I had been there for several years then, and life was pretty awesome. And I met my husband on a national tour doing theater, and we dated for like 5 years before we got married. And then I had my first kiddo at 35, and I realized over the course of a couple of years that I didn't want to be an actress anymore.
After
And
all of those years of that dream.
after all those years. And what happened is my husband went to grad school for classical acting. We moved from the city to DC and to Washington, DC, so he could do a 1 year classical acting program. And when he finished, I went back to auditioning. And we had this 1.5-year-old at the time, or almost 2 year old. And I realized, so I'd get a call back, my husband would get a call back, and I was like, I'm done. I don't have the energy for this. I want to be with my kid. And it set in place a whole host of things that I look back on now and go, oh, I see what was happening. It was the beginning of my midlife transition, is what was
Oh,
happening.
interesting.
And I didn't know that. I just knew that my values were shifting like sand under my feet. And by the time I got into my 40s, I was looking in the mirror going, who is that?
Yeah.
Who is that old lady? I don't know her. I don't like her. What's that poochie belly thing going on there? All kinds of stuff. It was like a lot of trash talk in my head when I'd look in the mirror
Yeah.
and was shocked at the new person that was standing there. Yeah, it was a shock. So that's why I'm excited
Yeah.
to be here and talk to you and younger people, because it was like having the rug pulled out from under me. And I didn't know why it was. I now know in hindsight what was going on, but I didn't know what the heck was going on back then.
I have so many questions for you. And I want to start with the very first one. I ask every guest this on my podcast to open up the show because I'm so curious of the answer. But what does happiness mean to you?
Happiness, it's what we all want, right?
Mm.
Don't we all want to be happy like all the
Mm-hmm.
time?
Mm-hmm.
It's really what launched me into doing my podcast was this inquiry. I wasn't happy in my all pretty much all through my 40s. I was not happy.
Wow.
And
Were
I
you
had
aware that you weren't happy?
Yeah. Yeah, I was.
Okay.
I was pretty aware that I wasn't happy. Part of it was that it was this when I was 40, I found a camera, which was a big help because from 35 to 40, I was just in the lost zone of who am I?
Mm-hmm.
What am I doing? Because I was no longer an actress, which was fully my identity until then. And now I'm mom and wife and all that. But what else am I? Who else am I? I'm not answering your question about what happiness is to me because I'm thinking, you know what? It's a really hard thing to define, isn't it? It's the pursuit of happiness. I
Hmm.
think that's what it is. It's like the pursuit of it. Like
Hmm.
I've been having a lot of conversations with people in Clubhouse lately about joy and
Mm.
playfulness. And I'm starting to think that the key to happiness is actually curiosity, is like staying curious. You know, they say curiosity killed the cat. Cat also had 9 lives, by the
Right.
way. So if we can tap into our curiosity about ourselves continually and look at ourselves with an openness and a kindness and compassion and go, well, what's next? I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago, 5 years ago. Maybe I'm not the same person I was yesterday,
Hmm.
depending on what things are happening, right? So what's next? I think
Mm.
that's happiness to me, is like that inquiry of like possibility and just the what could possibly be next for me. I
I
find
love
happiness
that.
in that.
I love that. I don't actually think that's a question that we ask ourselves enough. I think we can it's very easy to get stuck in the day to day, the routine that we've set. And there's nothing wrong with that. But like you said, you wake up one day and you're like, who am I? What did I just spend my whole life doing?
Yeah.
What am I living the way that I want to be living every single day? And it's like when you're looking, not even looking, but when you're sort of living outside of yourself, it's hard to feel that fulfillment within yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Because as kids, I've really tapped into this whole idea of really being mindful about playing more
Hmm.
in my own life because I am a, a workaholic, get things done, grind, drive, do all the things kind of person. I have
Yeah.
been that way. Just it's just part of my DNA, I guess. But the thing is that a lot of times what sometimes that brings me joy when I'm doing something I really enjoy, or if I've
Hmm.
tapped into the fact that I do enjoy what I'm doing at the moment. But sometimes it leads to a sense of overwhelm
Hmm.
and, oh my gosh, I have to do the thing. Well, my goodness, I'm doing the photography, which I love. I'm running a podcast now for going on 4 years, which I
Hmm.
love. But there's all the tasks that go around those things,
That we don't
that
love so
have to get
much.
done, like the social media and paying sales tax and doing all the things, right? So, how can we find joy and happiness in the mundane, in all the things that have to get done? And how can we make more time in our lives to enjoy ourselves, to play? Like
Mm.
I'm trying to balance it out right now between like making time to go roller skate, making time to get on my paddleboard in the summer and not feel guilty about it
Hmm.
and know that it is essential to my happiness and that it will actually feed into my focus and my ability to dig into the more mundane tasks when I sit down to do them,
Hmm.
you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that a lot. And I want to talk a little bit late bloomer living. So this is your podcast and like all of the things that you do. And where did this idea come from and why? And why do you feel like that is an important conversation to have, especially if you're talking to, a 20 something, a 30 something, I'm gonna throw this example out there for you as well, because we live in a world that is very connected by social media, obviously. But if you look at, different things on TikTok, for example, and everyone's timeline is different, but there's all this stuff all the time about, anti-aging and making sure you have
Mm,
glass skin and making sure that
mm,
you're beautiful and making sure that you're using product. And it's like, then there's this whole other side of like, people are saying that the generation behind mine, so I'm a millennial, but like towards the tail end of it, the generation behind mine, they say that, oh, they actually look older than millennials do because of all the stuff that they're doing to their face and the filler and the this and the that. And I know that's not the full topic of our conversation, but do you think that we've created this idea that aging is bad?
absolutely. Absolutely. It's like old should be you should put an E at the end of the word old because it may as well be a four-letter word. It is the reason when I was looking in the mirror in my 40s, I was looking at myself with disgust and telling myself terrible things. I mean, if I put my keys someplace and go, oh, where are my keys, or my phone, which I constantly misplace. Oh my
Oh,
gosh. It
yeah.
was like, oh, I'm having a senior moment. I'm making a joke of it.
Hmm.
But I started to realize that all the over the hill jokes, you're 50, you're over the hill. If
Hmm.
you go to the party aisle at like a party store and you go into that section, there's caution tape, there's like danger, old person. It is something that we have all been inundated with, and it's in the zeitgeist, and it is just relentless. It's relentless. Now that I know, I hear it in every conversation I ever have with anybody. And
Hmm.
it's like, oh my goodness, the fact that young people, Gen Z, are using Botox and fillers and worried about, and I know I was thinking about
Hmm.
how to keep my skin young when I was in my 20s, when I was maybe even a teenager. So this goes back, you know.
Hmm.
It
I think about that
is,
now for my
yeah,
own self. Like I spend a lot of my day like frowning, like, did that really just happen? Or is that like really? Like I spent a lot of my day like that. And I was looking in the mirror the other day. I was like, oh my God, I'm starting to get like the 11s and
the
like,
11s, you
yeah. And I'm
worry
like,
about it, right?
yeah. And
Yeah.
I'm like, well, do I do something about that? And I was talking to my family and they were like, do not put anything in your face. Once you start, you never stop, And I was like, okay,
Right.
fair enough. And I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with those things either. I think it's just like we need to understand the intention of why are we doing those things? Is it because of society's expectations of us to always look young and beautiful and whatever,
Yes.
right?
Absolutely it is. It
Oh,
absolutely is. I know that with every
with
fiber
others.
of my
Yeah.
being. And two, I was an actress. That industry is brutal for women. And I was
Yeah.
a theater actress more so than a film actress. But one of the reasons I was drawn to New York was because I felt like they were more open to real looking people.
Hmm.
And I liked that vibe better. The theater is a little more forgiving of aging with men and women. You can play a younger character on stage and kind of get away with it if you're in good shape and you have like a youthful vibe about you.
Yeah.
But for film, I can totally see why men and women have work done on themselves
Hmm.
because it is such a youth-based industry. And I can see why people in the tech industry are
Hmm.
shy about claiming their age. It's tied to their livelihoods. But what might be possible if we were to own it? If more people were to just get curious, again, curiosity about what's possible as we age. I have been afraid of aging more than death
Hmm.
my whole life. And I've known that about myself. And the reason I feared aging was because I assumed that it meant physical decline, mental decline was guaranteed. And yes, there is some decline that happens, but we have a lot of power over that we don't own. And what was happening for me, Simona, and my big aha moment happened when I was 48. I had actually achieved going full time with my photography business. So you'd think, oh, happiness, that's the goal. I was still unhappy and I still felt like a failure and
Hmm.
I was lonely and there was a lot of stuff going on. And I realized one morning when I was yelling at my kid to get out the door to get to school on time, get your lunchbox, get your this, get your that. And he had these big crocodile tears coming down his cheeks when I got in the car and I looked in the rearview mirror and I saw that and I was heartbroken and so angry with myself. And I thought, what is wrong with me? I'm almost 50 and I'm the one having a tantrum. Something's got to give. And I started doing a lot of self-helpy work,
Hmm.
and I found Mel Robbins' book, The 5 Second Rule. My husband recommended it to me, and I realized I had so much in common with her. And one of the things was the snooze button. And I decided, okay, I am not going to use that snooze button anymore. And I'm going to get up an hour before my family just as an experiment. And I'm going to meditate like I've said I wanted to do for forever. I'm going to start meditating every day. I'm going to move my body every day and just for 30 days, let's see what happens. And I set my phone across the room so my feet would have to hit the floor to
Yep.
go turn it off. And I did, it was hard because I was a night person, not a morning person. But I did it for, I'd say about a couple of weeks in, I started to really feel the difference. And about a month in is when I went in to wake up my older kiddo and kissed him on the head and said, "Hey, it's time to get up." And he randomly said to me, not knowing any of what I was doing, he randomly said, "You seem happier, Mom."
Huh.
And I was like, oh my gosh, this is all the evidence I need that what I'm doing is the right thing. And I started to feel so much better, so much more energy. And when I started to feel better in my body and my mind, I started to get hopeful about my future.
Hmm.
And I started to get curious about, oh, wait a minute. I'm almost 50. We're living longer. I might have 30 or 40 years ahead of me. What do I want to
Yep.
do at that time? And that once I started feeling hopeful about my future, I realized that that was what was missing in my 40s was a hopefulness about all those years ahead and what
Hmm.
they were going to look like. It was more fear-based
Hmm.
at that point.
You know what's really interesting is I think a lot of I say this from people in my life that I know that are older than I am, who have said to me, you know, I'm done living. I've raised my kids. I'm done living.
That makes me so
At the age of
sad.
like 55, at the age of 50, 55, 60.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think to myself, like, but you have so much more life to live. And your life isn't over because a phase of your life is over. And so, what advice would you have for someone who's thinking like that? Like how to transition from that line of thinking to a more empowering thought? Because I feel like that's a huge, huge thing. Like being able to like let go of what was
Mhm.
to welcome in what will become. But if you don't believe that you have anything left to give, like what's the point?
I don't know what to say to that person because they may not be ready to hear the message. It's almost like you have to get so uncomfortable that it forces you to make a change. And for me, I got to that point of being uncomfortable with what was going on. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
like who I was being as a mom.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't like who I was being as a friend. I was hearing myself talk to people, and the complaints that were coming out of my mouth were like nonstop. I was like, what a drag am I to talk to? You know?
It's true.
And yeah, before I found the Mel Robbins book, I had realized that about myself with the complaining. And I tried to give up complaining for Lent one year. Let me just tell you, that was the hardest thing I've ever done
Mm-hmm.
because it made me aware that the problem was way worse than I had even imagined because it
Mm,
wasn't just the complaining out loud, it was the complaining in my head.
right.
Yeah.
That is such a good point. And I think that this whole conversation is really interesting to me because I think that the older we get, the less we feel like we can contribute or can do new things or that we don't have time or, any of that. What are some things that you did to start to shift into living in this space that you actually wanted to be living in every day and a life that felt joyful for you? Because someone might look at, in their 50s and say, well, I'm in my 50s. It's already done. You know what I mean? Like I'm already done. But it's like what do
Yeah.
you what do we do to help shift society's thinking? Like how do we do that work?
I would say if somebody is happy in that space, then there is no
Mm-hmm.
problem, first of all. But if they're feeling like I was, stuck,
Mm-hmm.
unfulfilled,
Mm-hmm.
if there's that sense of ugh getting up in the morning instead of kind of getting up in the morning and going, all right, what am I going to do
Mm-hmm.
today? There's nothing wrong as in its essence with slowing down when you're older. In fact, I think a lot of what happens to us as we get older, and I still have a long way to go, but I think a lot of what happens is you start to go inward
Mm-hmm.
more, and there begins this kind of, I think it's what they talk about as the wisdom. I don't feel wise, by the way, but what they talk about is the wisdom that comes with aging. I know that I am more interested in my spiritual life now than I used to be. I would say if I were to give advice to somebody, the first thing they've got to realize is that there's even a problem. And until
Mm.
you're aware that is a problem, and that's why I talk about this with people, is because I don't think people realize that the internalized ageism that they're carrying around in their head and their thoughts. We have 60,000 thoughts a day, and they say 90% of those, or 95%, are negative. When you can start to, and this is part of why the complaining, me trying to give up complaining, was useful. I started to be aware of the complaints, and I
Mm-hmm.
started to notice the looping complaints that were continual, the
Hmm.
ones that kept coming around the bend. Now, complaints aren't bad in and of themselves because there's information in the complaint. So if it is on loop, that's an indication, maybe there's something I need to change here. Or is there something I need to accept about the situation? Are you going to accept the situation, or are you going to change the situation? But at least being aware of it
Mm-hmm.
gives you the facility to make that choice. And so for me, the meditation was a huge, I do it every day now.
Wow.
I love it. I never would have thought that I could sit for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Sometimes I'll sit for 40 minutes. Who knew? And I'm a busy lady, and people say, I don't have time. I can't sit for that long. I started with 5 minutes, 10
That's
minutes,
amazing.
you know, and sometimes I just don't want to get up. We need to give ourselves time to sit with ourselves and
Mm-hmm.
get comfortable with who this is. Who is this person inside?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe start touching base with some of the stuff you loved when you were younger. Like, that's why I'm back on my roller skates. I was so happy on my roller skates from like the age of 10 to 13. I was on my roller skates every day. I wear pads, I wear a
Yep.
helmet, I gear up, and they've come in handy, and I'm very glad I've used them. But I have so much fun on my
Mm-hmm.
skates. So if we can tap into fun,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, we're just so busy being productive, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
And we just don't stop to go, well, what else is there? What else is there?
It's like this box that we create for ourselves in our life, that life looks this specific way today. So this is the only way that it could ever look, and it's the only way that it will ever look, you
Yes.
know? And I think that as you get older, especially if you look at like stories that are passed on between generations, it's like you get older, you go to work, you have kids, and it's like this very like regimented, like this is how it has to be. And if I think about myself for a second, like I feel like I'm a person who's very like I try and have fun. Like I try and keep that youthful thing. If I'm around children, kids will gravitate because they like the energy and they play off of that energy. And it's
Mhm.
like at what point in all of the responsibilities that we have, because I also would consider myself a busy lady too, but at what point does society tell us that in order to be productive and do all of those things, we have to stop bringing in joy? It's like that is a story that we have created for ourselves because the only way in which we can be productive or contributing members of society or like doing all of the things is to let all of the other dreams die. And I think that people forget that life truly is like a manifestation of whatever it is that we want it to be, right? Like we genuinely can go out and do whatever we want to do. Even if you have to go to work and work a job that you don't like for 8 hours, like, okay, but what do you do with your time outside of those hours? You're not stuck. Like, you don't have to sit in that if you don't want to. You get to choose something different. You get to choose a different thought.
Yeah. Maybe like if your goal was always to be a medical doctor and
Mm-hmm.
you are 50 something, maybe you're not going to become a medical doctor, but what part of that could you tap into? If you always wanted to be an artist, go take an art class.
Or just
Just
buy the
dip your toes
supplies.
in the activity of it.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be anything for anybody else. You don't have to sell it. It could just be for you.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many things we can do. We can get our bodies into the best shape ever. There's this one woman that I follow on Instagram who didn't start working out until her 70s. Her daughter is a bodybuilder,
That's
and she
incredible.
was having some massive health issues. And
Mm-hmm.
her daughter was like, do you think we maybe could get a hold of this? And you see the before and after pictures of this woman, and it is incredible. She started weight training, and the difference in the way she looks is so inspiring. She's been on magazine covers now. It's crazy. And it just goes to show that it is never too late. And what bothers me is that people see that and they look at that person who's done that thing and they, oh, good for them. Good for them. But what about you? Maybe there's something for you in that. If you look
Mm-hmm.
at somebody and you feel a little twinge of jealousy or something, hey, wait a minute. Okay, that's information.
Mm-hmm.
There's something there for you to pursue. So
I
look
love
at
that.
that with curiosity.
I love that. I love that. Okay, I have one final question for you. And before I ask you that question, can you please tell my listener today where they can find you, how they can connect with you, and a little bit about your podcast, if you'd like as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the podcast is called Late Bloomer Living because I am a late bloomer. And I think everybody is a late bloomer in some area of their
Mm-hmm.
life. That's why I named it that. The whole thing started with telling the stories of other people who have blossomed later in life in some part of their life. And now I have shifted and kind of, I still do that, but I also have gotten into talking to experts about some of the issues that we face as we get older, like menopause and the fear of dementia
Mm-hmm.
and different things like that. So that's been a fun new thing that I'm exploring on the podcast. I wrote a book called In Full Bloom, A Guide to Aging Playfully. And I've started doing play shops around the whole idea of how do we incorporate more playfulness into our lives to tap into joy. So yeah, come find
I
me on
love that.
latebloomerliving.com. That's
I
what I'm
love
doing.
that. Amazing. Thank you so much. And my last question for you today is a question I've been asking for years on this podcast. I always get a different answer, so I'm curious to see what yours is going to be. But it's what is one way my listener can create a little more happiness in their day, every day, starting today?
Make time for yourself to daydream.
Oh, I love that. That's beautiful. And I don't think we do that enough at all. Because as soon, like I know this for myself, as soon as I hit the pillow, I'm like, what's going on TikTok? Let me just open that app up and let me see what's scrolling on over there. But you don't let yourself tap into creativity in that way.
Boredom is good for your brain. It's good for your creativity. If you just give yourself a little more time to just be and let your mind drift.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for coming on Happiness Happens and joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. And thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Happiness Happens. I hope you loved our conversation. Be sure to connect with both of us so that we can hear how much you loved what we were sharing today. I hope you have a beautiful day ahead. And remember that happiness happens when you're least expecting it.